Good evening, everybody. It's Steve with Real Progressives. Tonight, very special night for me. I have talked with Dr. Flowers in the past several times. The significance of Dr. Flowers is never lost on me. I've told this story to anybody that'll listen. Coming from a non-green background, Dr. Flowers was the very first green that I actually spoke to and met. And quite frankly, she was the first person I ever actually interviewed as Real Progressive. So it's always a warm feeling for me to be able to talk to her. But tonight we're going to touch on three very important topics. When I reached out to her, I reached out to her on the heels of Claudia, Arn, and Debbie. And Margaret wrote one of the most amazing pieces on white privilege that I've ever read. And it was one of those things where she didn't leave me with scalding marks on me. So I was reading it as someone who didn't understand white privilege. I was putting on that lens. And as I read it, I said, I could share this with anyone and it would get the point across and at the same time leave people with their dignity and not feel resistant and be able to say, there's a teaching moment. And we're going to also talk about their push, our shared push for Medicare for all. And we're also going to touch on net neutrality and the imperative it is that we fight to maintain control of our internet. So without further ado, let me bring on Dr. Flowers. Margaret, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Steve.
It's a pleasure. I really mean that. So let me ask you, you obviously got involved, we talked a little off camera, and you had made mention that, it was your right, it was your responsibility to speak out and as an ally for people of color, to talk about white privilege wherever it shows its face. And you read a really remarkable piece that I felt like, I broke it down in this earlier segment here. So talk to me a little bit about the surroundings of that and talk a little bit about white privilege and what the message to progressives in this movement should be.
Sure. Thank you so much. So, this is for myself as a white person and other white people, I know that this is a constant learning experience to be able to recognize white privilege and how it manifests itself in our daily lives. And it's something that, I wasn't aware of always, the extent to which it exists. And I still constantly am kind of learning. And so, the kinds of experiences that happened around that event that led to me writing the piece are very common experiences. And I was at a direct action camp a number of years ago where we really focused on this issue. And out of that camp, we each made a commitment as white people that it's our responsibility to educate other white people about how white supremacy works, how white privilege, where it exists, how it manifests. And we can't expect people of color to have to take that responsibility on. It's really not their responsibility. It's our responsibility. And so when, there was this experience that Claudia had at the United National Anti-War Coalition Conference, and I was there, I knew that Ajamu Baraka had been organizing with others this Black Alliance for Peace. We were very excited about it. I saw, a post from Arn Menconi basically saying, would somebody lay out here what's going on, explain this. And so I thought, well, that's an opportunity for me to try to do that as best I can. And so just trying to explain, some aspects of what was going on and how people often respond and kind of what our responsibilities are.
Let me ask you a strange question, or a question I feel is strange. I feel that white people in general have a difficult time talking about this in a coherent manner. What I've seen, and I don't know if this is the right word to say, but I'm going to use it. It's the best word I know. I think white people that are quote unquote aware sometimes overcompensate to try and make the point, and they ruin an opportunity to teach. This is what was so fascinating to me about the way you approached it. What are some tips you might give people that are aware of white privilege, that are beginning to understand white privilege, and that maybe are going about it in a fashion that really is not really winning the day. Yeah. Can you talk about an approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think that first off, we have to recognize that racism is a power construct. It's not just about race. It's a power dynamic of one race having greater power than the other race does. And in the United States, white people, just by the fact of the color of our skin, have privilege that other people of color don't have. And that's not, when we say that it's a racist society, it doesn't mean that each one of us is racist. It means that the system that we live in is a racist system because it privileges white-skinned people. And so it's not our personal fault that we live in this racist society, but it is our personal responsibility to do what we can to try to dismantle these racist systems so that they no longer exist and we no longer have that privilege or that power. And a common response from white people when we feel like we're being accused of being racist is to immediately, get hurt feelings and try to justify that, oh no, we're not racist because we do these good things, or we treat all people equally. But it's not about us personally. It is about the system. And as I said, until we work to dismantle that system, we're continuing to allow this racist society to exist. It's also really important for us as white people, I think, to not feel like we have some responsibility to swoop in and help Black people. We really need to allow Black people who want that to have, who want space to be able to organize and talk together, to have that space, recognizing that most spaces are white dominated. And so it's natural for people to want to have spaces where they can have conversations and not feel like there are white people in the room who may, try to take things over or whatever, people do. And so respecting those spaces and respecting that if, we can't just like swoop into a Black community and be like, hey, I'm a white person, I really want to help you. No, it's really about being invited in and stepping back and listening to what people in other communities would like in terms of what they would like from us to, for people to do. And really just respecting that self-determination, that privacy, that that other communities need. And there was one more point that I wanted to make, but I can't remember it right now. I'm sure it'll come back.
That's all right. I think that's great. I think that one of the things that's most difficult for me is, as somebody who wants to push this larger narrative because of my privilege, I sometimes just have a straight beeline for where I'm trying to get to. And I will run roughshod inadvertently over people who are trying to keep up, maybe don't have the maybe some of the background, or maybe they have a different experience or whatever. And I think I'm being inclusive. I think I'm trying to do what I'm doing. And in reality, Sorry, guys, we're having technical difficulties. Give me 1 second. There we go. I don't know.
Great.
This system is, it's got its own flaws, I guess. You know, it kind of has a mind of its own.
Yeah.
So just getting back to my point that I was trying to make, you know, I think that we mean well. You know what I mean? I think people mean well. And I want people to understand that, you know, this is not a, you know, bad you. This is about, hey, you've got a teaching moment. You've got to learn to be inclusive. And that means you might have to take a pause, means you may have to look around, means you may have to ask for some input before you bowl forward. And that's hard for people to do when their heart's in the right place in their mind, you know, and they think they're doing this stuff, but they don't realize that by trudging forward, that they are in essence acting on that same privilege. I mean, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Is that when we're operating, you know, when we're in communities of color, when we're in Native American communities, we really, as white people, have to be conscious of stepping back and not trying to dominate and kind of taking our cues from what's going on and, you know, offering help, but also understanding that if that help is rejected, that's not a personal rejection. I also think it's really important. So often people say, well, I meant well. I didn't intend to do something. But I think we can't see that as an excuse anymore. If we do something and even with the best intent, it has an outcome of causing harm to another person, no matter, you know, a small amount to a large amount, we have to own that. And we have to try to understand why what we did had that impact and then work consciously to try not to do that in the future. And it's not productive to beat ourselves up over this. We live in a racist society. Most of us grew up in this racist society, and it's just really important for us to be trying to understand how it works, why it works, how do we change it, and when we see other white people making mistakes that we recognize, gently trying to help them understand what's going on so they have that opportunity to behave differently. So, you know, this is one person I know said that racism is like a disease. When you get it, you have to spend the rest of your life healing it. And that's what we're trying to do, is recognize it and change things and heal it.
I love that. That was a beautiful, beautiful way of saying this. And I want to just say this, Margaret. For me, when I see someone such as yourself, you know, again, I remember when I first talked to you, I didn't know anything about green lingo. I was just picking up on this stuff, and it's taken me some time. I'm not going to lie. I don't want to say it's a foreign language, but it does expand the vocabulary. And so when you think about what we're talking about right now, I would imagine that if you're not in a diverse community, that some of this language, unless you're looking for it, might escape you. This is something, I think it's important that we're all, I don't want to say salespeople, that gives a bad connotation, but we're all representatives, if you will, of progress. And I think that as we take these steps forward, we need to be more aware of those teaching opportunities, even if they're not, again, I really like your approach.
Thanks. You know, maybe if I could just share maybe with some of the listeners, because I live in Baltimore City. I live in a Black majority city. I've lived here for 31 years since I came here for medical school. And Baltimore is often called the city of firsts. We were the first city to start doing what's called redlining, where literally banks drew lines on maps and would not give mortgages to Black families in certain parts of the city. So they really forced a hyper-segregation of our city. And also by not giving loans to Black families, didn't allow them to start businesses or to purchase homes that they could then pass on to their children. So there's been this real kind of theft of wealth. And we see great disparities in wealth and health in our city. in our state of Maryland, a court found that we never desegregated our higher education institutions. The state has drastically underfunded our 4 historically black colleges and universities and has basically stolen programs from them and duplicated them at all white universities, or white majority universities. And even when the court found the state in violation of this, the state is fighting it instead of trying to make amends for that. And so there's a historically black college in the western part of Baltimore City where Freddie Gray was killed by police. And that is a community that doesn't have a lot of jobs, is pretty run down. And if the city or the state had been investing in that university, it would have created more jobs. It would have stimulated, housing and other things around that. So it really has long-lasting impacts. And unless you're aware of how severe this system can be and how these generations of inequality have really disenfranchised and harmed black families, it's hard to understand, really when we say that, oh yeah, we should be talking about reparations. We should be talking about, when affirmative action types of programs, because we have a lot that we need to do to create an equitable situation.
Yeah, I want to bring something up and I want you to refute it or help me guide the conversation here. People, while we voted for Jill during the general election, there were many people of color that, and Democrats, quite frankly, that called us white privileged people for voting third party, for not voting for the establishment Hillary Clinton, saying that we had white privilege, that we could pretend like Donald Trump wasn't a threat, and so on and so forth. Now, obviously, that is weaponizing a terminology that really should be used to demonstrate a structure. Now, some people may actually believe it's white privilege to vote for a third party, and that's their right to say so. But I don't think that's the most constructive use of the term here. And maybe that's my bias because I'm pulling third party. But can you talk a little bit about that? Because that really became a very prevalent discussion point leading up to the November elections.
Yeah, I think first we have to recognize that when we see these kinds of ideas that are spread widely, that most likely it came from somewhere within the Democratic Party or its allies as a talking point to try to convince people not to support third parties. And I think that, what we're fighting right now is a system that's dominated by wealth and money. We have 2 major parties that both represent that. And so it's not like voting for either of those parties is going to create the change that we need. And so I think I could also argue that, voting for the Democrats is white privilege because, they haven't really been that great. Wealth inequality has grown tremendously under them. The wars, we so often, it's interesting. We have to have a global perspective. The wars that we wage are overwhelmingly around the world against people of color. We're not attacking European countries. We're not, and we are aggressing Russia now. That's a different thing. But overwhelmingly, it's South America, it's the Middle East, it's Africa, Asia that we're antagonizing. And that in itself, I think, is a form of racism if we don't understand how wrong it is for us to be doing that. Social transformation occurs when you have broad movements that represent the consensus of the population, and you have parties who represent those movements who can either win seats or push on the existing parties to change their platforms. And so, that's what happened if you look at what's happening in the UK. The Labour Party, like the Democratic Party, was a very neoliberal, militaristic party, and the youth rejected it. They said, we're not supporting you, and they put forward, through years of protests and very brave actions, and put forward the platform they wanted to see. And Jeremy Corbyn recognized he picked that up. Now, of course,
he's been part of that movement. He's been a longtime activist. He's been out on the streets. And so it was consistent for him to be that way. But it wasn't like they went to the Labor Party and said, we want to change you. It was no, they rejected the Labor Party and made the Labor Party have to, if it wanted to continue to exist, have to start to move in its positions.
That's fantastic insight. So that brings me to the next point, because a lot of the reason why you even know about Jeremy Corbyn, a lot of the reason why we know any of this stuff is because of our access to the internet and our ability to organize using tools from the internet, etc. That war right now is there's a war, going to take away some of the freedoms of the internet with net neutrality being at stake here. Can you talk to us? Can you frame that conversation for us?
Sure. So net neutrality is a battle that we won in early 2015. Our organization, Popular Resistance, was part of a broad coalition of groups that were pressuring the FCC to reclassify the internet as a common carrier, kind of like a utility, basically meaning that internet service providers could provide the internet service to your house, but they couldn't control what content you could see, or speed things up to certain websites and slow them down to others in order to, that's a way of controlling content. And so we fought very hard. This broad coalition fought very hard. The chairman of the FCC was not in favor of that position. We had to fight to get it on the agenda, and then we fought to pass it, and we won. And basically it means there can't be discrimination on the internet, that it can't become kind of like cable TV where, well, if you don't have this certain high-end package, you can't access these parts of the internet. So we're fighting that again, unfortunately, because the new chairman, Ajit Pai, who is a former Verizon lawyer, in May introduced rules to take net neutrality away. And this is an issue that impacts all of us. It impacts our ability to create on the internet, to have businesses on the internet, to organize, to have independent media. If we lose net neutrality, we're going to head down a road where we have a tiered internet, a monetized internet. And so this is not getting as much attention as it should, but it's a really critical fight right now. And July 12th is going to be a national day of action. If you go to our website, popularresistance.org, you'll find information about it. We also created a website called protectourinernet.org. And what we're doing right now is encouraging people to submit comments to the FCC, telling them not to take net neutrality away. And the deadline for those comments is July 17th. So it only takes a minute for people. We try to make it really easy and outline the steps for people to do. But also on July 12th, we're encouraging people to download flyers that we've made, go to very highly trafficked areas. Transportation centers are great, and hand out the flyers to let people know who may not otherwise be aware that this is going on.
It's interesting you say that, because I remember when the original net neutrality fights were going on, and quite frankly, it looked very bleak then, and then it went away. And here we are again. We thought we won, and now it's back. What is there any answer here, or do you think we have enough? I don't hear enough voices saying that we have a movement to push against this. We're in a decided disadvantage here. We could really see this happen, couldn't we?
Yeah, no, we could really see this happen, because it's absolutely the agenda of the chairman of the FCC. One advantage we had under the previous chairman is that he actually wanted to hear input from people. But Chairman Pai is going into this with a very aggressive agenda to dismantle net neutrality. Now, we joined that fight early. When we joined it, we learned about the rules in 2014 that the chairman was going to propose, and they would lead to a tiered internet. And we were working with some organizations, and they said, well, we can't get reclassification. That's not on the table. And we said, well, reclassification is the only solution that is going to work here. Otherwise, we're going to have a tiered internet. And so actually, my partner Kevin Zeese and I occupied the FCC. We held a rally there. We said we're not leaving. We set up our sleeping bags that night. The next day, more people joined us. We were there for 8 days. By the end of the 8 days, we had the whole side of the FCC covered with tents, people sleeping out there, people coming and joining us during the day. All the cars were honking, as they passed by and saw our signs. The employees were coming out and thanking us because they actually support net neutrality. And at the end of that 8-day period, when the public meeting happened, the chairman said, I want to hear both on my proposed rules and on reclassification. So in that 8-day period, it was not just us that were camping out there, it was also media that were writing about it, people that were calling into the FCC. There was a really big groundswell that basically just said, no, you can't leave this option off of the table. And so, and then it was a huge fight throughout that year, continuing to try to push it forward. The chairman tried to float out a hybrid solution, and we said, no, that's not going to do it. That's going to leave loopholes. We have to have the whole thing, and just kept pushing, and we won. And then it did go away. And actually, the internet.
Uh-oh. Give it a second, man. Sometimes BeLive has its own mind here. We'll have to see if we get her back here momentarily because she was at a really great point. In the meantime, though, one of the things that is fascinating to me about Dr. Flowers in particular, as you watch people that are, activists in particular like Dr. Flowers, you'll oftentimes see them in very, very small groups go do small actions. And then, you think to yourself, what can one person do? What can 2 or 3 people do? And invariably, when I watch them, they have the ability to go and people just congregate around them every single time I've seen. I remember watching them fighting outside of the debate for the DNC chair spot where Sam Ronan and the rest of the gang were fighting. And they were out front of that very, very small group fighting for Medicare for All, which was going to be our next subject. And hopefully Dr. Flowers can make it back. If not, the beautiful thing about it was that they were able to make it in there and demand and ask, hey, are you going to support single-payer healthcare? Are you going to support HR 676? Now, for those of you who follow me, you know that I have a problem with that bill only from the standpoint that trying to get it paid for with tax dollars, because it really is irrelevant. We can do it without doing that and probably have a smoother sail getting it passed to the GOP. But regardless, though, they were able to step up in front of them and get there and scream, hey, are you going to support single-payer health care? So in my mind, when you look at what people like Dr. Flowers do and Kevin do, these are amazing people that by themselves, by sheer will of commitment to these causes, they bring about movements. They are movers and shakers. And something, when you're an activist, to agitate is part of the deal, okay? It's really about making your life uncomfortable just long enough to realize that whatever it is that they're trying to bring to your attention is very important. And I salute them. And one of the things I was going to ask Dr. Flowers is, for those of you, I'm from the Washington, D.C. area. They're from Baltimore, but we converge on D.C. quite frequently. And when you go there, there's always this one guy sitting there talking about ending war. He's by himself, tent sitting there, signs all around him. You look at him, you just want to buy him a free hot shower, anything, give him a sandwich, whatever. He is there day in and day out. And you think to yourself, wow, one person's doing that? And yes, one person can do this. But in reality, it takes a giant movement. It takes all of us to be able to do this stuff. And Dr. Flowers and Kevin Zeese are perfect examples of that. Now, at the end of the month will be an anniversary for the Medicare for All push. I believe it was Medicare's anniversary or 50th anniversary, something like that. And they are pushing for many actions to take place then too, which I was hoping to give Dr. Flowers some time to speak to. And we'll probably have to catch up with her later on that. But in any event, folks, it doesn't look like we're going to get Margaret back, but I think it was a really fantastic interview so far. Without further ado, I'm going to thank you all. And I'm going to say, please keep tuning in to Real Progressive. Share this. Please get motivated and go out and share information on net neutrality. Please leave comments for the FCC. And also remember that as white people in this country, regardless of the back and forth, regardless of any kind of negative connotations, don't worry about what you hear. Just remember point blank, we have a responsibility to push away privilege and to lift up people of color and to bring true equality into our nation. So with that, I'm Steve Grumbine, and on behalf of Dr. Margaret Flowers, I want to thank you all for joining Real Progressives. Have a wonderful night.